just so everyone knows. Okay, and just to start off, I wanted to offer our profound gratitude to our festival sponsors. We thank the sponsors who support Reimagine and help make this work possible, along with all of your donations that we receive for our events that keep this work going. So thank you. And before introducing Claire, I just want to make sure everyone is acclimated to Zoom. You can turn on and off your mic during the Q&A section if you want to ask a question, or just raise your hand. You can turn your camera off if you'd like, but we always love having your cameras on as it makes us feel closer. If you have any questions, especially for the Q&A that will happen for the last 20 minutes of the talk, you can put them in the chat. And if you're finding the chat distracting, you can just click that little star, the little arrow, and close the chat so that it's not distracting for you. I'm going to introduce Claire, and I just wanted to note that Stacy actually was part of another event that we did as part of the Dose of Togetherness, and I've gotten to know him quite well and participated in one of his programs, and just to say that you're all in for a great treat today. He's a really special human being. So Claire is an internationally renowned author, speaker, and grief expert. She's the author of 3 books of nonfiction: The Rules of Inheritance, After This, When Life is Over, Where Do We Go? And Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Claire.
Thank you so much, Dara. Hi, Stacy, welcome. I am so excited to have you here today. For everyone joining, and for you, Stacy, I started having these conversations live online every week in March when the pandemic broke out and we kind of all went into lockdown. I just really wanted to create a space for people to come and talk about everything that they were feeling and going through. I knew so early on that there was going to be an intense amount of grief and anxiety and just kind of mental health stuff popping up for everybody as we forayed into this experience. And every week I've had a different guest on from the end of life grief kind of space, and we've been talking about just how people are feeling, different ways to kind of cope with it, get through it, and had these really rich discussions. I encourage all of you guys on today to put your questions in the chat bar as we're talking and during the second half when we start answering them. And Stacy, I'm really excited to have you on today. I've been reading about you, and I would love, rather than me read your bio, which I told you, I think it's sometimes so boring to have someone read your bio. Like just now when Dara was reading mine, I was like, I don't know where to look. What do I do? So would you just tell us about yourself? I know you're a dad, you're a veteran, you have an amazing organization, you were a National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, which sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, and most recently I was cleaning the toilets in our house because it's Thursday morning. So I was like, oh, I've got this thing at noon, which I had totally spaced. I think everybody right now, right? Like we're on all these different timelines and we're able to meet people and connect with people in these other ways that we never have. But at the same time, like you kind of forget about these, connections or whatever that are supposed to happen, or at least I do. And Thursday mornings are cleaning time. I work at a warehouse right now because I've been freelancing and speaking and doing adventure film and leading expeditions for a long time, and not a lot of that stuff is going on. So I work at a warehouse Friday through Sunday, driving a forklift just to make sure that our savings stays where they are.
Where are you located?
And I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. But before that, I grew up kind of all over in a way. I was a little kid in Botswana, and I love this hippo behind me here. And so I just kind of remind myself of that routinely. And then I grew up mostly in South Dakota. I was responding to, I hope I'm saying it right, Wavonia, who's in Memphis. And I used to fly in and out of Memphis a lot in the late 90s. I went to the University of Mississippi, love Memphis, love the spirit of the 903, love seeing what's going on in Memphis as it's, how many renaissances Memphis had in its lifetime, right? And I think, and it's coming back, right? Like we're seeing it again, and then COVID happened. And so in some ways I can kind of compare, I think, my career a little bit to Memphis, in that, especially over the last several years, I feel like I've almost had these like big breakthroughs, as it were, and then something else happens, right? But I think we forget sometimes of all the good things that are built through that process. I was in the Army, 2000, 2004. I served in Bosnia. You know, I think there's a lot we can learn from the Balkans and the Ottoman Empire about grief. I did landmine clearance in Angola and then the former Soviet state of Georgia in a place called Abkhazia. I went to Baghdad a year, 2006, 2007. And I've been in the States more or less since then, living in Philly for a couple of years, Boulder, Colorado for a couple of years. And then Salt Lake, we're going on our 9th year here in Salt Lake. We moved out here for one ski season a year ago so I could learn, or 9 years ago, so I could learn to ski, and we never left. And through that, I think like everybody, right, it's been a ton of ups and downs, and mostly ups, but then also, you know, I think as a veteran, as somebody in the 21st and 20th century, death is all around us. And that has definitely been, you know, I think over the last couple of years, one of the things I've really noticed, and I was thinking about this as I knew we were going to have this conversation, is that over the last couple of years, the deaths that I've been experiencing in my life aren't necessarily just from the military and veteran community. Like, in a way, I feel like I signed up for at least an acknowledgement that death was going to happen around me through combat and combat related and training issues. Also understanding that, you know, death by suicide in the veteran community has always been an issue, regardless of wartime. I didn't really know that when I was 17, but over the last few years, I've also seen friends of mine, and then in mountain sports, there's a lot of death, unfortunately. But over the last few years, friends and family, and in a weird way, it almost is like death is becoming banal because it's friends who aren't part of the military or veteran community or mountain community that are dying. And you realize, I think, your own age in that and how that means kind of you're growing up, right? And so that's been something that's been happening lately. So that's a little bit about my bio. I've gone back to ski in Iraq, to climb in Angola, to ski in Afghanistan, and am working now to figure out how we do a better job integrating outdoors and emotions like awe and beauty into our everyday life.
That's amazing. I want to wind around to the work you're doing now and the kind of work that you're doing, getting people outdoors for mental health and thinking about that. But when you first went into the Army, it was the Army you went into, what did you know about death at that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, oh, yeah, what's up, Wilder? Okay. So my daughter you'll hear her in the background. She's just had to let me know she's going potty.
Upstairs.
So keeping it very real in the pandemic. Yeah, what I know about death. You know, my first dog died when we lived in Botswana, Bonnie, and that was, you know, I think like any kid, that's oftentimes really traumatic. Where the Red Fern Grows made me cry.
Oh, it's one of my favorite books.
I don't know why they show that movie to kids. And I lost my grandfather in 1988, and I was very close to my grandfather. I had a special connection with him, and for years would dream about him, and he would visit me in my dreams, or it felt very real, and I would talk to my grandfather a lot. So that was kind of the first real death. And then, you know, I grew up in rural America, and from starting high school in 1992 to graduating in 1996, I think we started with 250 people in our class and graduated at 175. And the gap, there were probably about 20 people who dropped out or moved away, and the rest were death by suicide or death by, you know, farm accidents, vehicle accidents, motor accidents. So the death rate was really high. But those weren't necessarily kids I knew or knew well. But when I was 17, I didn't really know that much about death. It was just a thing that happened to other people, and it happened to your grandparents, and that was about it.
Mm-hmm. And so how did you really begin to learn about death during your time in service?
Well, I mean, the first thing, you know, you study a lot of history, and so there's I am so sorry. I've got to be right back. I'm hearing some
Totally okay. I have loved, one of my favorite things about the pandemic has been really getting to see everyone's like home life. I think it's really kind of neat. You know, prior to this, we all had these very polished work lives, either in person or at conferences or whatnot. And now it's like we just see everyone's living room and people's kids and their cats going by and all kinds of stuff. I think it's pretty amazing. I have 3 kiddos upstairs and a cat right next to me, and my husband's mowing the lawn right there, and I'm kind of annoyed that he's like right outside the window. But yeah, this is life. And then Adara's got her kids. No
We're all
problem.
good, dog and cat, kid, everybody's fine. So, you know, I think in history you read a lot, and I was always fascinated by military history, and I read a lot about it, and those were always kind of abstract. And there was a book, Faces of Death, by a military historian. It'll come to me later. And that was the first kind of real thinking about it. I was a born-again Christian during my time in college. My first drug overdose led me to that. I had a significant drug overdose when I was like 19, so I came close to death there. But it wasn't, and you know, see, death was always an abstract, right? Like I learned a lot about Bosnia. I ended up going to Bosnia in 2003, 2004, right? And there was, you know, concentration camps and genocidal actions there. But that was still really abstract. I don't think I really began to think about death until I was in landmine clearance. I was in Angola. It was the fall of 2004. And we were doing landmine clearance outside of a small village named Xinjiang. And there was a woman an older woman who was taking a donkey cart across a path, and we were telling her not to go there. We were in an active minefield. And even though I had seen death in Bosnia, I was maybe 20 yards away from this woman when her horse cart rolled over and what we would later decide was an anti-tank mine. And she was there, and then the explosion, and she was gone, right? I mean, the explosion was so violent that it evaporated most of the horse, the buggy, and herself. And that's maybe when I really first began to think about death as something that wasn't abstract. It wasn't something that happened to other people. It was something that happened to me. And then I think the experience of war in Baghdad was also, you know, a couple years after that. And I had been around a couple deaths like that around landmine clearance, very close. You know, I've had viscera from the physical body all over me at different times through landmine clearance and through time at war. But I do have a recollection of I was on patrol in Baghdad, and I saw these 2 dogs that were very, very happy, and they were eating. And it turns out they were eating the body of somebody who had been assassinated. And that has always kind of stuck with me, is like, what does it mean for the physical body and the spiritual? Like, where do those go? And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And having being versed in philosophy and religion around dualism and singularism and Spinoza's work and everything else like that, what does all of that mean? And I could go on around a few of those other stories and how those have dramatically impacted me or not. Because some deaths impact me in ways that I'm very surprised about. Other deaths of people that I was very close to, I have not impacted me in ways that I sometimes worry, you know, am I callous or whatnot? And then, yeah, I mean, when I got home from Baghdad, you know, I've struggled with suicidal ideology since I was about 11. And that's kind of through a lot of work that has ceased as a recurrent thought in my life since about last June.
What kind of work did you have to do to quell
Yeah,
that?
I mean, so one of the other things with Baghdad that was interesting is one of the individuals I worked closely with in Iraq was assassinated, and they left a letter specifically for me after I left Baghdad, so, you know, saying that I wasn't there to protect him anymore. And so this individual was killed because they had worked with Americans and worked with me. And it was about that time that I went in to get to try and get my diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder from the VA, which I've never got, actually. And at the time, you actually had to write down the American service member that you had seen killed, and you had to know their rank and social security number and unit. And I was in a very different unit where I moved around the battle space in a way where we would come upon other American service members and be unaware of their rank or unit. And they would oftentimes be unaware that we were in their battle space because of the nature of what I did. And so that was difficult. But I remember really thinking then, and we make this calculation, and we're making this calculation again in this country right now, which deaths matter and which deaths don't, and which deaths give us an opportunity for trauma, and which deaths were denied trauma, right? We're denied feeling those traumas, and trauma is attached to fiscal reward in this country. And so that was really, I think, a challenge for me for a long time, was why isn't my government concerned about, and my government is my, I'm your veteran, right? Like, I am yours. If you're here and you're on this call from the United States, I am literally your veteran. And you are my neighbor, and this is our country. And my government and the people of my government didn't think it was valuable enough at the time that I could be traumatized from the death of an Iraqi. But I think what it was, I started this journey to go back to the places where I had a lot of deep trauma, going back to Iraq, going back to Angola. I've been to Afghanistan. I haven't been back to Bosnia or Abkhazia yet, but kind of in that journey, interestingly enough, I was also able to go back to South Dakota, where I grew up. I was able to go back to Botswana last summer. I was able to go back and speak at the University of Nebraska, which is a wonderful university, but there was a lot of trauma about why I didn't go to school there with family and everything else like that. And I was also able to go back to the University of Mississippi for both for speaking gigs, and college is a traumatic place. And so I think it's been an intentional deep dive into, I think, picking up myself. And I think in many ways, I just was listening to a podcast this morning, Preach by Nathan Hale, beautiful podcast exploring a lot of different religions. And Nathan's a Mormon and is having a crisis of faith. And so he deals with it by just talking to people of all these different religions. And the woman on the podcast said, I encourage you to go back and give advice to your younger self. And as you're giving that advice for these different stages, you'll likely hear the words that you need in your own life. And I think by being able to physically go back, which I realize is a tremendous privilege to these places, I've been able to have those conversations with my younger self. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, the pandemic, which I wouldn't wish on anybody, but has been such a tremendous opportunity for my partner and I and our daughter to come together as a family and really have some time to do some deep reflection. I think what it is giving myself the allowance to love and be compassionate to myself in a way that I was missing for several years.
Gosh, I talk about that all the time with people. I can't believe how hard we are on ourselves when we're vulnerable, when we're hurting, when we're wounded. And finding that kind of level of compassion, that self-forgiveness is such a key piece of healing. I really want to go back to what you were saying a minute ago, though, about why we place importance on certain deaths over others, or how we choose to deem someone traumatized or not. What do you think needs to change in order to, amend some of that, or make it a broader and more compassionate space?
Geez, I don't know. That's the $1 million question right now, right? Mm-hmm. I've been reflecting a lot on love and compassion. I've been going.
Did Stacy just freeze for me, or you guys?
Yes, he froze.
Okay.
He's frozen.
All right. Give him a sec and see what happens. I want to hear this answer. I'm like waiting.
Yeah, I can send him the call-in information in case he needs to. I'm gonna chat him.
Sorry, guys. Give it a second.
I'm gonna turn off this video. That might work.
like that his daughter's name is Wilder. That seems appropriate. That seems like a good fitting name for him and his family. Sorry guys, we'll give it a second. I'm so interested to hear what he has to say on some of this. My father was a World War II veteran. My dad was 57 when I was born, and I was the product of his third marriage. And he was a World War II POW. He was a pilot in World War II, and he was flying bombing missions over Europe, and he was shot down over the Czech Republic, and he was taken prisoner and taken to Germany. And he was in a German prison camp for 6 months until the war ended. So I just grew up with these amazing stories about his life. When I was 22, he reconnected with some people in the Czech Republic around the area where he was shot down. He connected with a historian there, and he and I took a journey over there, and we saw the place where he was shot down. We like walked around the fields where his plane crashed. We had this really amazing experience together. But he was definitely, oh, Stacy's back. I'm just talking about my dad, Stacy. Sorry. Wow. My dad was a World War II POW, and I'm just thinking about the kind of the trauma, but also the kind of wisdom that he came through his whole experience with, and how it infiltrated and informed his entire life and mine to a certain extent. So I was really interested to kind of hear what you were going to continue saying.
Yeah, I mean, he just said, love and compassion is really, if it's not love and compassion, everything else is just exhausting and divisive. And I think we're feeling that like fear of vulnerability and openness in a really huge way right now from a lot of people who have never been asked to be vulnerable. And I feel like, so much of what's needed is, and it's the pandemic, so it makes it even harder. But I just there's a lot of people in the world I want to hug that I don't think have ever been hugged. I don't think they've ever been told they're enough. I don't think they've ever felt mud between their toes. I don't think they've ever been able to take the time to sit in front of a bumblebee and question the absolute absurdity of a bumblebee, right? I mean, they're ridiculous looking insects and they fly. And I mean, over the last 10 days, we got these caterpillars and watched them turn into butterflies. Like, good luck explaining that. I get the science. It makes no sense.
Oh no, we lost you again.
I sent him the call information. I think he should just dial in is my feeling.
All right, guys.
Well, I don't know. I could speak a little bit to the program that I did with him. If
yeah, tell us about it.
Okay. I mean, so he has been doing, so normally he does these kind of adventure programs in person out in the wild. But given the pandemic, he developed one that's virtual with his work partner, who is a therapist. And the idea was that you were in a small cohort through the week. And it was like, basically you were at camp, and I would just, it was just like a commitment of an hour a day to be on Zoom with 6 or 7 other people.
He's back. Stacy, okay. about
I'll leave again. I apologize. I don't.
Wait, Stacy. I sent you the phone number call information. So if it does drop out,
I'll just call back in.
Call back in. Yeah. So you have all the information for that.
Yeah, I kind of joke living in Utah. Anytime. Well, yeah. How funny is it, right? Like talking about. Really specifically, more men need to be more vulnerable and open to this in this last world crossing over, and the internet's like, no, shut him down, stop the vulnerability. But I think going back to, earlier, I mean, the toughest, strongest men I know are all really open, vulnerable people, like guys who've climbed huge mountains and crossed big deserts. And like the only way you can do that stuff, I think, is to be really open and allow for more feminine energy to come in and balance masculine energy. I think stuff like that's really important. And I think part of it is also just this recognition, going back to a lot of the work that Reimagine's doing. I'm sure a lot of the work that you're doing, Claire, is recognize, like, talking about death, recognizing death. Like, it's a transition. It's gonna happen to all of us. It's nothing to fear, right? Pain, we can fear pain, but I don't think we should fear death. I don't think we should fear whatever that transition is. And that's hard. And I get anxious about it too. I think about, what if my daughter dies before me? And that's a painful thought, and that's a difficult thought. At the same time, it's something that happens to all of us. And I think, trauma and death are two of the things where we should be able to find universal humanity and engagement with each other on. But even now, with so many of the deaths happening outside of the central viewpoint, it seems like in America, we're okay with these numbers of deaths as long as they're not people we quote unquote care about, or people who are for some reason deemed important. And I think that's a real challenge. And I think, but it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, right? I mean, we've not really cared too much about the opioid crisis in America because it happened to the rural poor. So why are we going to worry too much about the pandemic if it's happening to old and sick people? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, we treat our old and sick heinously in this country.
How do you personally hold space for all of this? The kind of angst or the anxiety about it, or the anger about it. How do you get through it on a personal, deep basis?
Yeah, I mean, I've been riding my bike a ton. I think a lot about time outdoors is a huge part of it. I think allowing yourself to be humbled, allowing yourself to seek beauty, and allowing yourself not to know the answers, but to continue to ask the questions, are things that have really helped me. I also have this amazing 101-year-old great aunt who has been providing tremendous amount of perspective for me. She's an atheist. She's been a lifelong atheist. That side of the family came over to the United States because they were free thinkers, and they were persecuted by the authorities and the religious leadership in what's now the Czech Republic. And at her 100th birthday, I remember a very unique conversation she had with an aunt of mine who said, you must be so excited to see Warren, which is her husband. She was like, well, Warren's been dead for like 20 years, and I think most of his body's gone, so I wouldn't want to dig him up now. And a lot of people, and it was just so funny, right? Like the way, because she was just so matter of fact. And that's really helped me kind of with this too, is this recognition that, like, yep, at the end of the day, my body hopefully will be, an opportunity for other life forms to continue to grow and live and, sprout flowers or whatever out of that. And I think thinking about that long perspective for me has been really helpful. I'm reading a book right now about the Oregon Trail, and really recognizing that this is not new. This behavior is not new for America at all. Yeah. But maybe there's an opportunity for us to, after 200, 300 years, maybe we can actually, I feel like what is new is that there's a significant part of the community that is wanting to make and create positive change in a way that I don't know if we've had before. Mm-hmm. And that's where I get through it, is like, humanity is dirty and messy and crappy, and we do really heinous things to one another, but we're here for such a limited time, and the opportunity for joy and grace and beauty is so immense. And I just try and hold that tension within my head and in my heart, and it doesn't always work. And some days I'm an absolute mess, and those are the days where I absolutely need to get out on my bike the most.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being honest and vulnerable about that. Tell us about your programs and your connection of mental health and getting outdoors, and how you started this, and what it looks like today.
Yeah. So when I came home and I felt like I was at a T intersection thinking about ending my life And I didn't really think about it as suicide as much as our death, as much as I did just disappearance, which I think a lot of people do when we think about that. And I like also watching my great aunt go through, and this is a little bit tangential, but watching my great aunt as like people have tried to extend her life for our own selfish reasons to have her around. I've also thought a lot about what it means for, compassionate and doctor-assisted suicide and what that means. And, Wendell Berry speaks a lot about that. Wendell Berry and his brothers, right, took his dad out of the hospital and hid him in a barn so that he could die with dignity. It's written about very beautifully in fiction. So I shouldn't say that actually happened. I don't know. I think Wendell wrote that as a novel. But yeah, so it was that or go back into the military, because that was all I knew. And I was struggling with who I was outside of the military. And a friend got me out rock climbing. And I can look back on that now and recognize that I had a tremendous somatic experience, and that being pulled into the moment through outdoor adventure and experiencing awe allowed me the curiosity to begin to want to live again, right? And I got curious about what it would look like to live, and what it would look like to live as a climber, and what it would look like to live with more time outside. And so for years, I've done that work as a guide and bringing people out. And how I got connected to DARA and Reimagine was through the Greater Good Science Center. We had done a bunch of research on the emotion of awe with Dr. Keltner. If you haven't had on, you absolutely should. He'd be great for this if he has the time. Death is an awe-inspiring experience, right? Kurash, my friend Kurash Rasek and I were going to launch, we were like, what's missing in outdoor adventure? Like, how do we help people find potential transformation? And that was, we thought we needed to help people set intentions before they go outside, create adventure and connection, and then integrate that into their daily lives after participants left. And with the COVID, we ended up doing that online. And so we're taking a big break right now. We ran 6 pilot projects in the spring and summer. Dara was a part of it. It was super fun. We know we have a great product. Now we've got to figure out how we can bring that product and also support ourselves through the use of that product, and hopefully be successful enough that we can someday give that product away more and more. We're just not in a position to do that right now. But yeah, and so we've been doing adventures at home, and it's been great. Like, I think people have redefined what adventure is for themselves. They've helped redefine it for us. And what we love about the program is that you get 1 hour. We ask participants to take 1 hour a day to do whatever adventure they want, right? They can walk around the block. They can write poetry. Some people just dress up in their ski gear. We had people look at birds. We had people watch adventure film. And then we get together for what we call a virtual campfire. And that's just an opportunity for people to share like they would around the campfire. And what's so cool about it is that it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. You get to go at your own pace and have your own adventure. And you don't have to worry about holding anybody up. You don't have to worry about perceptions. Can I carry enough water? Am I going to set the tent up fast enough? I can't climb that mountain. I don't want to go whitewater rafting. But you get to live vicariously through other people's adventures. And seeing that level of cross-pollination was super, super cool. And we had professional athletes join with, we had one paraplegic join us, and he was part of it. And that's the great thing about these little Zoom boxes, actually, is there's so much equity in this, right? Like, we can't really check each other out. We don't know how big. We can't create perceptions about one another, because we're all the same size, right? And we're all moving at the same pace, and we're all having the same things I don't know what was happening when I got upstairs, but we're all having those same types of life challenges come in, and dogs and cats and internets. And I think it's really, really liberating. And at first we were like, yeah, it's 60% of what you would get in an actual outdoor experience. But then we're like, oh, this is something completely different. But hopefully we'll relaunch those this fall.
What did those look like when they were pre-pandemic?
Yeah, pre-pandemic, that's the work I've done for a long time. It was all outdoors, my favorite medium for offering potentially transformative outdoor experiences, usually whitewater rafting or paddling, because I can take anybody in a boat. I can get anybody in a boat. I've gone down the river with quadriplegics. I've taken quadriplegics down rivers. I've taken people with one elbow joint and a shoulder joint and missing every other limb and movable joint on their body for multiple days, and they've had a great time. So the river is just such a wonderful equalizer. And I mean, that's why it's always used, the river Styx, right? You got to cross over the river Styx. I mean, there's so many things about the river in our lives that keep showing up, and the power and importance of water. So we would do 4-day river trips predominantly.
Wow, that's amazing. I have never gone rafting.
Well, you've got to do it. So we're hoping as soon as we can figure it out. So I was hoping we might be able to do a Big Bend trip down in West Texas this winter, because Big Bend, if you've never been to Big Bend, put that on the top of your butt. I love Big Bend so much. West Texas, it is out there.
What is it about doing something like that that is good for mental health? How is something like that? I mean, I know some of the obvious answers, but I would just love to hear you spell out, like, what is it that you feel when you're out there that just changes something for you and shifts something?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's it is that emotion of awe that we have, and diving into that, it's because awe is an emotion, right? So it can be positive or negative, right? Like, emotions aren't inherently good or bad, right? Like, joy isn't necessarily always good, right? Like, sadness isn't always bad, and I think, like, the more we can embrace sadness is an opportunity for positive as well. But it's that feeling small in a good way, like, right? Humility. Do you ever have those people, like, that give you a view? What?
Humility, is that?
Yeah, like joyous humility, feeling you're part of a much bigger system, letting go of that control. That we always have. I think feeling the meld with the group is always really positive after 2 or 3 days. So it's just those emotions, and then it's that curiosity, it's that willingness to listen that we have when we're outside that we don't have on the indoors often. And I think that's a part of it. And for me, I see a question about PTSD, and I've worked with vets for years. That's been the main emphasis of my work. One of the things I realized, though, through time outdoors is that I, as a veteran, didn't own PTSD. For a long time, I felt very much like I did. And as a nation, we allow veterans to have PTSD. We allow maybe kids with cancer to have PTSD, and sometimes first responders, and really nobody else is allowed to have trauma in this country, right? Like, it's your fault if you have trauma, but it's certainly not my fault if you have trauma. But if you're a veteran, I'm willing to, thank you for your service. Let me know what I can do. And so now a lot of my work is, I've tried to grow the work we do. And I think those of us who are veterans, who are I like how you said post PTSD. That's an interesting way to think about it. I'm really going to have to dig into that thought. But I think those of us who are maybe comfortably living with PTSD, or have found ways to embrace it as part of our lives, and from time to time turn it into post-traumatic strength, I think we have an obligation to share that trauma is a deeply universal experience, and that time outdoors is a deeply healthy part of the experience for everybody, and can lead to some of that curiosity and mind setting. But yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I think it's the humility. And then there's all sorts of things that happen too, right? Like our body chemicals, and our minds shift, and hormones come in and out, and protein markers change. Our body is actually relaxed when we're in the outdoors. And we have these moments of awe. There's a deconstriction of our veins, so our blood's flowing more smoothly. You typically sleep better, at least after a couple nights. Your heart rate will oftentimes slow down, respiration slows down. So all these things happen. And I just think it's our natural way of being that does that. But you can get it. I love doing big multi-day trips, and there is something magical that happens on the third day. Dacker and I have hypothesized kind of a midterm memory, right? We know long-term memory and short-term memory. And we've hypothesized this midterm operating memory, which makes a lot of sense to me, that you kind of respond to life based off of the last 72 hours of your life. And so if those last 72 hours have been in a beautiful, awe-inspiring setting with good people, that's how you're responding and that's how you're reacting to things, right? Versus if the last 72 hours have been nonstop news and cell phones and pain and hate and anger and divisiveness, and you're just fighting for joy. When you're in the outdoors, you don't have to fight for that joy. And those other things wash away. So I think that's part of it as well. Like I had such a good ride last night with some buddies I don't always get to see. And, you know, I've been giggling all day just thinking about that ride just from yesterday, just from a couple hours, and I'll be laughing for the next 3 or 4 days. And so that stuff is really real. There are some significant chemical changes.
What do you think people can be doing right now who are, you know, feeling really kind of trapped at home, or their mental health stuff is getting stirred up or deepening for them in this kind of isolated environment? You know, we keep kind of coming in and out of quarantine. There's a lot of frustration, there's job loss, there's anxiety. A lot of people are very isolated. Some people are not in spaces where they can get outdoors. They're more urban environments where they're kind of stuck at home right now. What can we do for our mental health in this environment right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you can get out and walk around, and there's things like all trails and things that'll tell you where to go and what to do, I think your neighborhood is great. But if you're in one of these really isolated situations, I think there's a few things to try and do. I think order some butterflies, right? Like order caterpillars. It's like $20. I think it's $4 per. It's really easy. Order some caterpillars and grow them and watch them and release them. Order physical maps. Is there a place you've always wanted to go? As opposed to looking online, we know screens can kind of screw with our eyes and everything else like that in our heads and our minds. Order physical maps and dream about and plan a journey you would like to do. And that's a good one. Dig into old or new adventure literature and think about some of those things, like Doug Peacock's grizzly years. Doug came home from Vietnam, spent 35 years with grizzly bears. Isabel Bird's A Woman in the Rockies. You know, she was one of the first women to go into the Rockies. Gosh, there's so many great adventure books, I think, reading. Watch surf films. I'm a horrible surfer, but I can watch surf films all day long.
Me too. I love surf films and surf documentaries. I can watch them all day, and I definitely do not surf.
Yeah, like I am the worst. I'm such a horrific outdoor athlete. A good buddy of mine calls me intermediate but willing, and I was like, an intermediate feels like a stretch. But I've also, like my friends are like my friends from home that I grew up with are like, how is it that you skied in Iraq? And I was like, not prettily, but you know, I just went and did it. So I think those are some of the things, you know, and then find those people to connect with, you know, online, or make phone calls.
I really think we have to do it. I think we have to reach out and get connected, you know, even though that this kind of forum isn't what we're used to, or we may feel like it's not as good as in person. It's better than total isolation, right? I really have been encouraging people to try to reach out and stay connected more and more. There's another question over here. Did you see this one?
I did. And Chauncey, that question is something that we are thinking really actively about right now, because, and there's actually a program, the guy that I was talking about earlier, Ben, and I are thinking about a program with another friend of ours, Sasha Dingle, who runs a great project called Mountain Mind. And Sasha's a professional athlete, mountain athlete. And I went into the outdoors to get healthy, and a lot of people I know in the outdoors has been the cause of a lot of trauma or the result of trauma. And how do you balance that, right? And so a friend of mine who was on the Freeride World Tour 2 winters ago, walked out of her driveway, fell and broke her knee. And that was it. And she had been a freeride skier for years. And as she rehabbed, she said, this is the first time in my life I realized I'm actually spending time outdoors, because I was so focused on competition this whole time. And I think, you know, a great metaphor for that is one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Sugar, which is about a baseball player who travels from the Dominican Republic, and he gets into the minor leagues, and then he ultimately quits professional baseball and just plays for fun in New York. And you realize this is what it is, right? Like just this joyous part. And so I think when we look at, kind of the respect and awe for the power of the outdoors versus amplified anxiety, I actually think amplified anxiety is the negative side of awe, or one of the outcomes. When we have a negative experience with awe, we might get that amplified anxiety. And I certainly felt that. I mean, of awe in, like when a dust storm comes barreling down on you in Baghdad, like that's an awe-inspiring experience, but it gave me tremendous amplified anxiety, right? And I wasn't in a place where I could enjoy that beauty. Now I look back on it and I think about some of those moments, and they are awe-inspiring because I made it through. So then we have to look at what are those different outdoor experiences. And I think I sometimes, I really focus on the things that made sense for me. And I think that oftentimes happens in therapy or therapeutic situations. We're like, well, this is the Kool-Aid that worked for me. Now everybody, like, don't just take a sip, but just gulp it down like I did. And that's not at all what we need. My friend Brigitte, who, Brigitte,
We lost Stacy again. I'm confident that he will come back because he keeps popping back. But in the meantime, you guys, if you have any questions you want to put in the chat bar, or let us know if you want to come on live and ask him, you're welcome to. We only have about 10 minutes left, so hopefully we can get him back soon. Yes, we haven't gotten that Oregon Trail book yet. We'll have to.
Oh, there's a question for me. About just of my experience in Stacy's class. Yeah, so I don't know, it ended up being pretty special. Like I am somebody who loves adventure and travel and, being out in nature, but I, live in the Mission of San Francisco and don't have a car, so it's hard for me to get out of the city right now. And it kind of just the experience of kind of thinking about how can I incorporate more adventure into my life right now. And just, it kind of like opened up a different way for me to think about things. And I mean, one was like, because I think for me, like adventure, it makes life exciting. It like makes, and so like one thing I ended up doing was creating these little packages for my friends with googly eyes to like put on that you can like put in a public place and like turn something or like take some object in their house and turn it into a living object. And it was like, I got on my bike and I just biked around the city and I dropped off these little packages. And it was like, and this was, in May, and I was feeling a lot of heaviness at that time. So I don't know. So for me, it just kind of like pushed me to like think about how even with some of the constraints I have right now, that I can build in a sense of adventure in my life.
I love that. Did anybody else do anything surprising or?
I think it was like, when he was talking, I'm trying to remember a surprising thing, but I think when he was talking about sort of having some like, I don't want to say objectives in mind, but like kind of some things that you're either looking for or like want to get out of an experience, kind of setting those before you go outside or on like that, just even having some of those things can create more meaning out of the experience. So I think a lot of like the themes of what people shared was sort of even just how things that they had done before, they kind of went with a different intention. And then they ended up like noticing a lot more things that they hadn't before, which, I think.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like Stacy really needs to write a book next. I want to read like his adventure memoir, or it's just his memoir of kind of everything.
Yeah.
We'll have to convince him to do that.
Yeah. Well, and then it was interesting. So his partner, Karash, who's a therapist, prior to going on our adventure week, he did kind of a therapy session with each of us, kind of where he was trying to kind of like just through a line of questioning, sort of unearth like what we want to get out of the experience. And then he would actually in real time, as you know, we were doing our shares, kind of reflect upon what he was hearing. And that, I mean, I kind of felt like I got, I don't know, not free therapy, but it was like a nice, sort of, again, I think in terms of sort of setting intentions, it was like making this feel like a very like deep experience. Wait, he might have, I can't tell, he might have, are you there, Stacy?
I am, and I do
okay,
want
good.
to
Okay, sorry. It just showed your phone number,
no,
and
no, this is great. No, this is awesome.
Welcome back. We don't have too much longer, and I would love for you to finish what you were saying to Chauncey, and then we can. There's a couple questions here that people are asking.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I mean, Brigitte started out, right, like looking out her window, and then she got motivated to go down her porch and walk around her block, and came back out into the world. And we met, you know, through that conversation when she was just starting to walk down her steps and into the world, because somebody said, hey, I think you two should connect, and I don't really know why. And years later, throughout this whole process, I mean, Brigitte used to walk backwards up hills because she claimed it was the only way she could do it. It was the only way she was strong enough to be able to do it. And it would take us, you know, an hour and a half to get up a 300-foot hill, but I would learn so much, and we would have so much fun laughing the whole time or crying or whatever. And years later, I had a trip I wasn't able to go on. I had a last stop, and they really wanted a veteran to go on this trip. And so I called Brigitte and I said, hey, Brigitte, like how do you want to, I've got an opportunity for you to go to Alaska for 12 days canoeing, but you've got to leave in a week. Can you do that? And she's like, hold on. So she called her mom. Her mom said, yeah, I can watch your daughter who was 16 at the time or something like that. And Brigitte went to Alaska. So Brigitte gets back from Alaska, and I call her and I'm like, how was it? You know, was it a good time? And she's like, yeah, that was incredible. She's like, I've never been to Alaska. I saw caribou, I saw wolves, I saw polar bears, I saw all this stuff. And I go, yeah. And she goes, I said, what was your favorite part? And she goes, you know, I've never camped before until then. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, you didn't ask me if I had ever camped before, but I figured if these are Stacy's friends, I'll go. They'll take care of me. And so our first time camping was on a, you know, like a 10 or 12-day river trip on the Canning River in Alaska. And so I think it's, you know, so going back to Chauncey's point, like we have to find people where they're at, ask them where they're at, and then take those gentle steps and recognize that adventure is a deeply personal thing, and we shouldn't try and define that for other people.
Yeah, thank you. People are really wanting to know what the Oregon Trail book is that you mentioned earlier that you're reading.
Yeah, I'm actually walking up to grab it because I saw that question. It is The Oregon Trail.
Okay.
New American Journey by Rinker Buck. And Key and his brother went across the Oregon Trail like in 2015 in covered wagon.
All right. Did you see Linda's question about wanting to know more about your comment about college being traumatic?
Yeah, I just think, you know, I mean, it's the first time a lot of us are away from home. We're just discovering new things about ourselves. You know, I think a lot of people go to excess with things. I did too many drugs. I was an excessive drinker. You're trying out new theories, new identities, new things, and a new place. And I think that can just be really traumatic for a lot of people. It's just challenging, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing too, is a lot of times you know, trauma can be certain traumas can be very rewarding and growth from, just that the trauma of daily life, right? Without necessarily having to be a big, huge, violent trauma that we don't want anybody to have. I just think life can be really traumatic as we're trying to figure things out and who we want to be and our identities. And going back to that butterfly metaphor, you know, we're constantly in one of those stages, right? We're either working towards something, we're in a cocoon, or we're becoming something new. And I think we're constantly in that. And I can only wonder what a butterfly thinks about when it's like, what is this wing? What do I do with this? Where's all my legs? I used to have a lot more.
Absolutely. Mary wants to know if there's a database of research on the topic of awe. Who was the person you mentioned again?
Dr. Keltner at the Greater Good Science Center.
Is this your partner or the person you're working with? And
Dacker's been my research partner. My partner for Adventure United is a guy named Kurash Rasek. And you can find him and his work at Evo Health and Wellness. And obviously, you know, read Claire's books. I'm excited to, but I think there's a lot of other great books on trauma out there. You know, Gabor Mate's work is phenomenal. You know, The Body Keeps the Score is another really good book around trauma. But the awe work, Dacker, if you look up Dacker's name, Dacher, and then Keltner, Keltner, and the science of awe, he was the first person to really start studying it, and now his kind of first generation of graduate students are out in the world doing incredible research. Paul Piff out of California Irvine, and was an amazing researcher at Toronto. Some folks at Arizona State doing some really cool stuff.
Awesome. And when are we going to be able to read your book, Stacy? Are you telling me you're working on it right now?
Sort of, I am. Yeah, Dacker's been really pushing me, and yeah, I think this is the year. I'm looking at my whiteboard right now, and you could maybe see it behind me, but it says Family Build Adventure and Expedition, which is Adventure United Adventure, and then write. So I've been writing and need to keep writing.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. Will you tell us where we can find you and find more of your work, or sign up for your work, or what you have coming up?
Yeah, you can find me at Stacy A. Bear, STACY.
Oh, I can, it's Stacy Bear.
Stacy A. Bear.
abear.com. Hold on.
Oh,
well, and just to let everyone know, when we send out the follow-up email, we will include his contact information and way to find him.
Careful to Google Stacy Bear.
Wait,
Wait,
Stacy, you cut out for so long. You started to say your website and then you were gone until just now.
Oh, StacyBear.com. STACYBARE.com.
Okay, so no A. Okay,
no.
Okay.
No.
Great.
The Instagram is Stacy A. Bear, but the website's just Stacy Bear.
Cool. Yes. And I don't know, Claire, I just want to note Maureen's question, where it's a little farther up in the chat. But she was just talking about feeling very constrained here as a Black woman because of the white supremacy attacks. And, you know, I mean, her follow-up question to that was sort of how this program kind of addresses concerns amongst marginalized communities. And so I don't know if you want to respond here, you know, I can respond as well.
Yeah, I can try really quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to have a larger conversation about that. If you want to put us in touch directly, if she's open to that, because obviously I have all the privilege. I'm a 6'7" straight white guy, cisgendered. I've been misgendered often because of my name, so I've had small glimpses into what that looks like. Kurash is an Iranian American, so he's been a great education for that. And then we do, you know, adventure is definitely, you know, dominated white supremacists without a doubt, right? I mean, if you look at the history of adventure, especially in the last 100 years, and you look at, you know, everything from Mallory forward, and we do try to address that and do try to work at dismantling racism, but there are other, and we try and learn from and engage with other organizations like Girl Trek, Outdoor Afro. CJ Goulding is starting a program called Boys in the Woods, CJ is a young black man in New Jersey who's been very active in the outdoor space. Tyree Moore is another individual who's a young black man who, strangely enough, was actually one of my partner's high school students before we knew each other when she taught in DC. And so we try to actively engage and learn from and hear from them. And part of our work and part of the reason that we have stepped back a little bit to try and raise money and resources so that we can not only make this work for ourselves, but that we're not asking people to give free labor, but that we're able to pay and engage. And we think that's a big part of it. And there, I could list a number of other resources and would be happy to share some of those more resources with you around other activists, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and queer activists in the outdoors that I follow, that I listen to, that I work with, that we're trying to engage to help continue to dismantle those things around white supremacy in the outdoors. There's a lot of ableism in the outdoors, and those are all things that we are working at. I think what I would say is I think there is some opportunity with the Zoom calls and what we've done with Adventure United to have a greater sense of equity and justice within that community, because we're meeting each other, I think, at times in a safer space. But I'm not saying we have all the answers by any means, or that I haven't made mistakes along the way, or won't continue to make mistakes along the way. Growing up, with this privilege, I realized that I have to work daily to be less racist, less sexist, less homophobic, less transphobic every day.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you guys all so much for being here today. I really love these conversations that we get into. I think that they're always so rich and inspiring, and we learn new things. And yeah, anyway, thank you so much, Stacy. Thank you, Dara. I look forward to seeing you guys all next week.
Great. Yeah, and
thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Wow.
Yeah, no, that was a lot, and we will send out information about how to reach Stacy. And I just wanted to note that we have an upcoming dose of togetherness on Monday with one of the founders of Sadhana, which is the Coalition of Progressive Hindus. And she's going to be talking about grief related to gender-based violence, which has actually been on the rise since the pandemic. And there's going to be a little ceremony kind of meditation at the beginning. So I'm just going to put the link in there for those who want to attend. But anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. And we will be announcing shortly the program for next Thursday. It's almost finalized, so we will keep your eye out for that one.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
bye, everybody.
Okay, bye.
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 Bye, Helen. Bye.
There.